Hi, everyone. My name is Kirk Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. In today's episode, we're speaking with Farmer Lee Jones, a speaker, expert on farming, and part of the founding family of the Chef's Garden, a farm that uses innovative technology and traditional farming techniques to deliver high-quality produce to some of the world's leading chefs. Farmer Lee has appeared as a judge on the Food Network's Iron Chef America, Restaurant Impossible, and ABC World News. His many awards include the James Beard Foundation's Award for Who's Who in Food and Beverage, and being named as one of the Daily Mail's 60 coolest people in food for several years in a row. Join us today as we chat with Farmer Lee about farming techniques, working with chefs, sustainability, and life as a farmer. Welcome, Farmer Lee. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. One of my favorite people in the world, right there. There he is.
Back at you, buddy.
What's happening on a farm today? Weather, harvest, everything?
Everything. It's interesting. We've had plenty of rain in August, ample. That being said, we're planting in the top 1 inch of soil every single week. And even though there's a lot of moisture down below, that top 1 inch gets dry. So we plant every week because we want to have that continuous supply of quality product at the right size, at the right stage, so that when chefs around the country and around the world call in and want a petite Sylvetta arugula, that we can go out and harvest that. So even though there's moisture down below, that top 1 inch gets dry and we have to irrigate. And interestingly enough, the temperatures have been, I think it was like record heat in July of 2021 throughout the world. Hottest month in history, which certainly lends towards supporting the global warming issues. But the seeds have to be warm enough to be able to germinate, but they can also get too hot to germinate.
Okay.
And so we find ourselves planting right at dusk as the sun's setting, and then watering to bring the temperature down, and then watering again to bring that temperature down in the morning to get them to sprout, because it can get too hot to germinate them.
Gosh, there's so much science to it. And not to go down farming 101, but boy, you've got to pay attention to the weather patterns, future weather patterns. Is there always a plan B when it comes to farming, just in case something doesn't go as planned?
Well, I will guarantee that things will not go as planned. That's part of farming 101. And plan B is be prepared for the fact that things are going to go wrong. One of the big things is excessive rain. And there's an old saying in farming, and people probably, as they drive by fields, don't even understand that there's what we call tiling in the fields. And it used to all be dug by hand. And maybe some folks have seen them and not even know what they were. They were orange in color. You could get them in you could get them in 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, 10 inch, but usually they were 5 inch and they're 1 foot long. And you would dig at the highest point in the field, and then always make sure that you're going down and you drain to a creek bed, so that the water, when it comes down through the soil, can get into those tiles. You don't seal them. You just put those tiles one against the other, and there's a little crack, and the water can go down into those tiles and drain. And the old saying was, because it's expensive to put it in, but it's even more expensive not to put it in. You could go 9 years and say, you know what? See, I didn't need that tiling. And on the 10th year, it puts you out of business.
Boom.
So the old saying was, you pay for tiling whether you put it in or not.
Yeah.
And so traditionally, you put it about every 60 feet. Some places will put it 40. On our farm, because it's so specialized and so much hand work, we're actually putting the tiling every 10 feet throughout the whole farm. It's every 10 feet.
And
get that water off. So if you get that 3 inch torrential downpour in an hour, you have an ability to be able to get rid of it quickly.
That makes sense. And the tiling is there constantly. It's always there. It's always part of the.
You put it in the ground and it stays there.
Okay.
And it's below where you might hit with equipment, with a plow or a disc.
Sure. Okay.
And you know when you hit one, because then you'll have this big torrential hole.
Yeah.
And all the water will drain. You got to go in and patch it.
And patch it up.
Yeah.
First and foremost, Farmer, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you, um, for all of the love that you give back to the students of Escoffier. We visit every few weeks or so where we jump on and we talk to students. Just last week, you drove all the way up to Chicago to participate in an event with Escoffier students and others, and it's it's so appreciated, and I want you to know that. And I also want to recognize the fact that you're so selfless and humble when it comes to your time. You are a farmer. You are constantly busy. It's 24/7, right? There's no days off, but yet you find time to give back. And so just a big thank you for that from the entire Escoffier family and from me, of course.
Well, I got to jump in there. I mean, I appreciate that, but it's so exciting to see the hope and the enthusiasm and the encouragement of the Escoffier students. And it's just as rewarding for me, hopefully, as it is for them to be able to talk to them, to be able to encourage them. It's such an exciting time for them to be involved in the Escoffier program and to be able to come out of this ready to be able to tackle the world and all of the culinary opportunities that exist right now. So it's very mutually beneficial. And that's what good relationships are built on.
That's right. That's right. So, beautifully said. Beautifully said. So because the story's so endearing and so beautiful, and I've come to just love to listen, can you talk a little bit about your family, about the farm, how things got started? I mean, we're past 30 years, right? Close to 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look first at this, where we're at, the location. Yeah. We all know the 5 Great Lakes, but Lake Erie is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes, and we're 2.9 miles inland from Lake Erie.
Okay.
And it's the shallowest, consequently, it's the warmest. It's what we hear of when people talk about a microclimate, maybe don't even understand, but it's something about the geography of the land that creates an environment that's unique to that region. If you get further away, if you get 5 or 6 miles out from this area, the microclimate does not affect it. But it's all old lake bottom, some of the richest sandy loam in the world. At one point, there were 330 vegetable growers in this county. European settlers recognized this as an amazing growing area. This area was huge in grapes before Napa Valley was. And so it was steeped in tradition of growing vegetables. And we tend to be able to get on a freeway and go anywhere pretty quickly today, where we take that for granted. But if you go back into the 20s or into the 30s and the 40s, roads and refrigeration had not developed to the point where there was a lot of outside competition. It's ironic that we're working towards more of a regional distribution and regional and local food consumptions and consuming food that's produced more in our region today. And if you go back to the 30s, that's what existed, because the other options weren't there. And so if you think about where we're located, we're an hour west of Cleveland, an hour east of Toledo. We're right on Lake Erie, only 2 hours north of Canada, a couple hours north of Columbus. So you had all these large metropolitan areas with big numbers of people, and then this amazing growing environment right in the middle. And those farmers did quite well. And my dad actually went to work for a very progressive grower. That progressive grower recognized the change that was coming. And that was that roads and refrigeration were improving, and that larger farms could now become an impact on this region by doing it in a mass production and cheaper. And so one by one, those 330 vegetable farms disappeared. Just like if the listeners can think about going back to their childhood and thinking about their hometown and thinking about how many family-owned grocery stores were there as a kid that are no longer there because they've been replaced by a chain grocery store. So my dad went to work for a very progressive grower that worked cooperatively with about 65 other growers. And they were able to compete with those larger farms that were coming in and supplying product. My dad ended up buying that farm from Mr. Nichols, and they had some very good years. We were farming about 1,500 acres of fresh market vegetable when I was 15 or 16 years old. My dad, interestingly, went to work for Mr. Nichols at 14, and then in the 60s bought that farm. Had some very successful years. By the time I was 15 or 16, we were farming 1,500 acres of fresh market vegetable. We had some good years, but we were farming the way the universities were teaching. It was all about mass production. Earl Butts, maybe listeners have heard his name, or maybe they haven't, but he was a significant part of history, probably on the wrong side of it. I would say he was on the wrong side of it. Let's take the probably out. His message was to get big or get out. Mm-hmm. And agriculture at that time was really the economic engine that drove growth in the United States, because it was the one thing that we could compete on a world scale very, very efficiently with was soybeans, wheat, and corn. And we could ship them and compete anywhere in the world. And we produced very efficiently. But it was all farming chemically, genetically modified crops.
And there was incentive to do that, right? There was,
financial incentive.
Sure.
Yeah. And we were farming chemically. We were following the way the universities were teaching to farm at that time, even though it kind of went against what my dad had learned from farmers in the past generation. He was going down that path. Ultimately, we failed. Interest rates at 22%. And we had a very horrific hailstorm that wiped the crops out. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And when I was 19 years old, I stood and watched 25 years of my parents' work being auctioned off. All of our neighbors were there, all of our competitors, everybody that was there to celebrate our failure. I stood with my mom and dad, my brother and sister, and they auctioned everything right down to my mother's car at our house. And it was a horrific day. If I think about it for more than 2 minutes, I can be in tears. But I think it also was a blessing in disguise, because it was so severe that it made us make major changes. And when we started, rethinking, what are we doing? It just didn't make sense. And we started looking back at agricultural books from 100 years ago. I mean, you can't help but talk about nutritional levels. In 1930, the nutritional level in vegetables was 50% higher than it is today. We're going the wrong direction with the chemical farming and genetic modification. So as devastating as it was, it allowed us to kind of reboot, if you will, and kind of go back old school. In a lot of ways, you'll come to our farm and you'll feel old school. You'll see tractors that are 50 or 60 years old. Why? One, we know how to work on them. Two, they were smaller, they were lighter. You didn't get the compaction on the soil, but they just tend to make sense on small scale farming. And so
so your family, so your family had the wherewithal, despite the setback, to step back and do some additional research, I think you said, and kind of figure out a different way. They didn't give up, which is really, really a beautiful story.
Well, and some people said we were too stupid to quit. And, but it was in our DNA. And, I've seen
passion.
Chefs. Yeah. I've seen chefs in the same situation that were on top of their game, and they had 3 restaurants or 30 restaurants and doing really well, and they lost everything, and it's in your DNA to start over.
Start again. Yeah.
You know, they can't take your trade with you.
Yeah.
And, they can take everything else, but they can't take that, and they can't take your passion. And we started over, but we did look back, and that certainly impacted greatly the direction that we moved, and started really back at farmers markets. And then we met a European influenced chef. And actually, she was just on the farm last week. We had her come.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great.
I hadn't seen her in 21 years. And that day was the day that we opened the Culinary Vegetable Institute. And I only saw her for a few hours on that day. And I hadn't seen her then for 20 years earlier. So,
is that where the name Chef's Garden came from, sort of through that process?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's just a beautiful story. And then fast forward, how many years ago was that then when you restarted?
40 years ago.
40 years. Okay. So fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about chefs. we were talking earlier. If you have that photo there, I want to go down that path. So
Yeah.
you can see Marco Pierre White over here. I have to tell you a quick story. So my wife Gretchen and I were in Dublin years ago, and it was her birthday and mine. We're walking down the street in downtown Dublin. I'm telling her about Marco Pierre White, right?
Right.
His, you know, his original restaurant, the book, you know, just who he was.
Right.
And then I stop in my tracks. I look across the street and I see Marco Pierre White Steakhouse. And I'm like, what is happening here? Yeah, you can't even be making this up. So
Right.
we go over and make a reservation for the next night. And this big photo here when he's really young, right? When he was in London and such, is the menu, is the actual menu. Now he
Wow.
wasn't there. He wasn't there, but the food was exquisite. The service was over the top, but he was one of those original, let's say, bad boy chefs, right?
Yeah.
Who knew what he wanted, right? He knew what he
Right.
wanted. And you've got you met him, right? You've got the photo close
Yeah,
by there.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right here. We were actually at National American Culinary Federation convention, and Jamie and I got to speak. I don't know whether
There he
you can
is. There he is.
see
Yeah.
that, but we did get to hear him speak, and he was just being whisked out to his limo, and we happened to catch him for a quick photo. So
Fascinating. So
he reminds me a lot of Jean-Louis Paladin, who we met from the Watergate Hotel, who was a highly touted chef that was
Sure.
brought in from Europe to cook there. And he would, you know, Marco Pierre White, he certainly was not bashful about saying what he thought, and neither was Jean-Louis.
Yeah. Well, they made a big difference in the country, and you're really, really close with a lot of these chefs. I want to talk over on the other side of my of my office. I've got a framed menu. Another interesting story, years and years ago, and I had my own restaurant, and I started reading about this guy named Charlie Trotter, and what he was doing in Chicago. And that this was, you know, before the day of you know, internet and all of that. So I picked up the phone. I guess my whole approach in my restaurant back then was I had menus from chefs that I admired adorning the
Right.
walls, right? And I'm like, you know, I want to get one of Charlie Trotter's menus. So I called the restaurant. A very lovely person answered the phone, took my message, and about a week or so later, I got a little package, and it had several menus.
Wow.
And the one I framed, it basically at the top, it just said, and it's a vegetarian menu too, way back then, 1994, right? And
Way ahead of his time.
Charlie signed it at the top. Keep on cooking, Charlie Trotter, one of my
Love it.
prized possessions, right? So talk a little bit about Charlie. You have a special relationship, or you had a special relationship with Charlie over the years, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours. I mean, Charlie Trotter did more for our family than we could ever repay. He was one of the first chefs in the country to have a prefix vegetable menu. It was an offering, and he was so far ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He just he invited us to on 3 different occasions to bring 20 people from the team here. We took Jose to J.C. Penney's the day before, and he bought his first suit.
Okay.
And we rented a bus, you know, a small bus, and he invited us to come in for our team to experience the level of cuisine that they were doing. And it was so visionary when you think about when we got there, we were in training, and so was his staff. He had his staff come out, talk about the dish they had prepared and why it was important. And he had he said, every one of you is going to ask 2 questions. We're starting with you. Go. And so went all the way. We were there for like 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, and when we got on the bus to go back, he was right there shaking everybody's hand, thanking them for coming, handing them a gift bag with 2 books and a printed menu from the day. And he gets back on the bus after everybody's on, and he says, I know Farmer Jones has told you, you all have to be on your best behavior, but I want you to, after this bus starts moving, I want you to look under the back seat. There's a case of champagne. I don't remember the kind that it was.
No, I
And
love
he says,
that.
I expect it to be gone by the time the bus gets back home. And the whole bus erupted in cheer. And,
Isn't that something? Yeah, that was Charlie. My executive chef here in Boulder, Bob Scherner, and I both went to culinary school together, and then he went to Chicago and worked for Charlie for a couple of years. And boy, the stories are fascinating. I remember one time, Farmer, I was there as it was, they called it a guest chef, but I was really honored just to hang at Charlie Trotter's
Yeah,
for a
right.
day, right? And so I got there early in the morning, and they gave me my responsibilities and
Sure.
all of that, and then I cooked for my family who came in later that night. Long day, but the thing that really amazed me was the organization. Very little refrigeration.
Right.
He was
Right.
getting deliveries all day long, right?
Right.
And what really fascinated me, I think the first service was at 5, the second was at 7 or something like that, 6 and 9, something like that. And everything paused for a moment around 4 o'clock, and they completely cleaned the kitchen as if they were closing. And then they had family meal for all the staff. And it was important. It was really important. And then it started all up again, just
Right.
way ahead of his time. Talk a little bit about Curtis. I know Curtis Duffy, Michelin starred restaurateur, also very special to you, right? He has nothing but admiration for you, by the way, as well.
A great friend. Um, I've known him since he was a line cook at Muirfield Village Golf Club down
Oh,
in
wow.
Columbus, Ohio. I mean, I'm talking
That
back
takes
in the
us back.
80s,
Yes,
in the
yes,
80s.
yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
He worked under Chef John Souza there at the
Okay.
Muirfield Golf Club. And it's just been fun to watch him rise to such a
Yeah.
level of status of one of the greatest chefs, in the country, if not in the world. And, he's been to the farm and visited several times. I know that he came with the opening team of Alinea with Grant Achatz. Before they opened Alinea, Grant brought his opening team out. They spent
Yeah.
3 or
Yeah.
4 days at the Culinary Vegetable Institute doing menu development and team building. Curtis was on that team. 7 years later, Curtis brought his opening team. And that's really been kind of the benefit of the Culinary Vegetable Institute. It's a place for chefs to be able to come and do R&D and R&R. Jose Andreas brought 16 from his R&D team, and they spent 3 days, and they banged out an entire vegetable book in the 3 days. They brought the journalist and the photographer, 16 R&D chefs, and they developed recipes. He walked around in his bare feet and his pants rolled up. But Curtis,
At home.
they're
Yeah.
just, you just can't. I couldn't say enough good about Curtis. He's been a great friend. He's a true professional, and it's just an honor to know him and to be a small part of what they're doing at Everett. They're doing some amazing things.
Yeah, they really are. So these relationships with great chefs who only want to serve, the best products that they possibly can. Is it challenging at times are they demanding?
Well, of course they are, and they have to be. They're under such an enormous amount of pressure to,
Yeah, yeah.
every single night. I mean, Charlie Trotter never served the same menu twice, and I think that Curtis operates under the same regime of just constantly upgrading and constantly that expectation that it's always got to get better. And yeah, they do. They're pushing us, and that's okay. We're honored to be a part of their team. And we know that if we don't provide them with the products they need to be able to elevate themselves against the competition, then what good are we?
Yeah.
So,
it's
important.
That's great feedback. I want to segue a little bit to, again, coming back to the farm. Can you speak a little bit about technology? You spoke a lot of, your roots and going back to doing what's right. But how does technology and innovation play its part on the farm today?
Well, some people say when they come to the farm, it's like the Willy Wonka chocolate factory. And you see a lot of widgets that we've built. Necessity is the mother of invention. And a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do or trying to harvest or trying to grow at a different stage or size than traditional marketplace creates some necessity to be able to produce mechanical equipment in some cases to be able
Mhm.
to aid us. Everything is ultimately harvested by hand, but
Yeah.
you'll sort of
Yeah.
see old world where we're going back to trying to get as good as our grandparents were, but yet you're also seeing technology involved that perhaps our grandparents didn't have available. It comes from scheduling of planting product and trying to be able to track and have the right volumes of product at the right time in the right quality levels. The technology to be able to expedite the product from literally the field. If you can imagine, this isn't a giant Cisco warehouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
What they do is amazing, and nobody can do what they do. We're kind of the opposite end of that, in that our inventory, if you can visualize, is all literally growing every single day. And the inventory is in a field or in a greenhouse or in a storage. And so we use the technology to be able to have that product available on a daily basis. When the chef from Disney calls and says, I want a petite Sylvetta arugula, and a petite is defining a particular size that we can go on any given day and be able to harvest the product at that size and get it washed and cleaned and shipped and on their plate by the next day. So technology really does play a huge part, and it's evolving daily. And, it's one of the most affordable things in the world is technology. It wasn't so long ago, Chef, that we were using a Garmin. And who needs a Garmin today? It's all
It's in the phone.
it's all right there in this
Yeah.
little, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so that technology is moving. And as a small family farm, if we don't embrace that technology, we're behind. It's
Sure.
an opportunity because it continues to be more and more affordable every day. So we look and embrace the technology. It's imperative for the survival and the regenerative nature of our farm to embrace the technology.
You speak a lot of Mother Nature's rhythm, natural rhythm, if you will.
Sure.
Can you walk us down that?
Well, one of the most frequently asked questions is, what's your favorite vegetable? And my answer always is, well, what season is it? Yeah. And I think that even if we're really in tune with our bodies, I don't know whether you've ever experienced this, but I know that I can attest to, there are times when my body says, you need Swiss chard, you need red beets, you need spinach. Your body, if you're really in tune with what you're eating, it will tell you different minerals. I read on a National Geographic where the women were actually eating soil because their bodies were craving a particular mineral, and it was instinctive.
Yeah.
Nobody would think, gee, I'm going to eat soil. But there's an intuitive nature about your body. If you're in tune with your body and listening, it will tell you what to eat. And I guess the natural rhythm is Mother Nature provides a beautiful menu for us. It's not so much anymore, but early on, chefs would be frustrated with, I've got to come up with a new menu. I don't know what to put on the menu. Look to Mother Nature and she'll provide that for you.
She'll tell you. Yeah.
What fish is in season? What is it? Poultry season? Is it pork season? But going into the vegetable, it's such a beautiful rhythm. I mean, if you don't have tomatoes on the menu now, don't put them on at any other time because they're at their peak right now. And
let's have asparagus in the spring rather than October, right?
When asparagus is in season, we should eat it 3 times a day.
Yes, we should.
And then when it's out of season, we should lust for it for 10 more months.
There you go. There you go. What about the current state of farmers in the United States? I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that, but are there challenges?
Well, absolutely. And I think that there's an argument to say, without the capital to start, it's very difficult to start from ground zero and say that you're going to farm, but it is possible. It's one of those things where it takes very low dollars to engage and be involved in agriculture. So it's one of those things. It's probably more possible to get into agriculture than it would be to a restaurant. I'm encouraged. There were more vegetables planted last year, more vegetable seeds purchased last year, more gardens planted last year than in the history of the United States.
Really? Okay.
Even going back to the Victory Gardens after World War II. And you know, this pandemic has been devastating for all of us. We all have friends or family that we've lost, let alone the financial burdens of this and the pressure. I don't think that we'll know fully how severe this thing was, because the burdens it's put on people and the stress levels it's added, the anxiety levels. I think there's a lot of negative that we can drum up around the ripple effect of this. But I think that we've got to look for those silver linings in any tragedy. And I think that, and I'm hopeful that, you know, kids emulate parents. And you're a family man, Chef, and I love to see your posts on Facebook with the kids at baseball. The kids emulate parents. And there were more parents planting gardens last year than in the history of the United States. Well, kids want to be out there helping in the garden.
Absolutely.
And if kids help plant a carrot, they're a lot more excited about eating the carrot and pulling that carrot out and understanding where the carrot came from and then cooking it and eating it. And 100%. So I'm encouraged that we've started. One of the little silver linings in this, just maybe, is that we've started a whole new generation of gardeners for the next 50 to 60 years. So it's a small thing.
Beautifully said. I love that.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe that the Chef's Garden, so many years in the making, can serve as a model for others?
You know, I'm always hesitant to say that, and maybe others might be able to say that better. We always say that we struggle to get our own house in order, much less tell somebody else how to do that, run their own household.
Yeah.
Certainly people could benefit from all the mistakes we've made. My dad said we have to continue to make mistakes at a faster rate than the competition.
Yeah.
But he also said that we make mistakes well. So, I mean,
how you learn. It's how you
even
learn.
The book. Yeah. I mean, people say, how long did it take you to do the book? Well, the short answer is 2.5 to 3 years. The long answer is 40 years. 40 years of trials, tribulations, mistakes, and hopefully a handful of successes. So, yeah, maybe there's a lot of great growers way before us. I'd be hesitant to say, hey, look what we're doing. Follow us. We know what we're doing. Follow us. We make enough mistakes that I wouldn't be too eager to say, oh yeah, we're the champions. Follow what we're doing. I wouldn't do that.
That's the humble response that I knew.
The champion of mistakes, the champion of errors, the champion of failures. From that respect, we could tell you a lot of things not to do.
Michael Jordan missed more shots that he made, right? So,
for sure.
You know, every few weeks you take the time to speak with me and a new group of Escoffier students that are just about to go out onto their externships. Right now, we do that on Zoom together, and it's really a nice time. It's a time that I always look forward to. The students typically receive a little package of vegetables from the farm right before we get on the call, and you talk about farm to table, you talk about the programs, and you talk about the importance of exposure to everything we're talking about here today. Farmer, how important is it in your mind for young culinarians today to fully understand where their food comes from and and not only where, but how that food is produced the right way? So many people don't have exposure to understanding that.
Well, I can tell you that there's a lot of food that's produced in America where the people don't have any idea where it's coming from, and they're able to produce literally millions and millions and millions of plates of food without that knowledge. Mm-hmm. That being said, is it a push through or a pull through? I think that the consumer is more savvy, more in tuned, more interested, more knowledgeable about where food is coming from than ever before in the history of the United States. We let that slip away from us. It existed in America. We knew where the chicken was coming from. We knew where the vegetables were coming from. And was it our fault? Can we blame somebody for why we let that slip away? The frozen TV dinners. I mean, you remember those as a kid, just like I do. My mother thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread because it was two people in the family working outside of the home, where my grandmother's generation stayed home. It was gender specific at that time. Grandma stayed home and grandpa worked outside at another occupation, and she took care of the family and cooked, and in many cases took care of the garden. We let that slip away. But I think that the consumer today, the next generation, I don't know, is that the X generation or the Y?
Or are we to Z? Or starting back over
Z.
at A? I can't.
People want to know where their food's coming from. They're interested in how the environment is taken care of, how the people on those farms are being taken care of. Are they being paid a fair wage? Is the food being grown the right way? It's product with purpose. And I think that goes so much more than just the depth of the food. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the culinary students coming out of Escoffier in any of the culinary schools to really make a connection for themselves personally, to know where the food's coming from, but also to communicate that out, because the consumer is interested in that and they want to know all of those things. And it can add so much value to the experience for the end consumer to be able to know, and we can add value to that experience. Look, if we were just satiating our bellies, we go to the grocery store, we go home and we cook. If you're going out for the experience of that. You're satiating the belly, of course, but the psyche, the mind of you want to support something that supports the beliefs that are important to you. So it's product with purpose, and it's never been more important than it is today.
I love that, product with purpose. I wrote that down. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. The Instagram handle, shameless plug.
Farmer Lee Jones. We would love for you folks that are listening to keep us posted and tell us what you're doing and where you're at. The future for the culinarians in the world and in the United States right now has never been more opportunistic. You know, the pandemic, again, I'll go back to it. Horrific. But the creativity in the culinary world just blows my mind. To think of the ways that we found to be able to get food, to create an experience for people that were kind of on lockdown, but restaurants found a way to be able to produce food. So a lot of those aren't going to go away. The restaurants are returning, but all those other tentacles that we figured out are just now, we multiplied the job opportunities through the pandemic to 2021 by tenfold. There's never been a more exciting time to be an Escoffier graduate than right now.
Oh, I love it. There is no greater passion than Farmer Lee. Farmer, the name of the podcast is The Ultimate Dish. So we've come to that point in the show to ask you, what is the ultimate dish?
Well, I would ask you what season we were in. And
I knew it.
Since I know that it is.
Oh, I love it.
It is peak August. We've had 90 degrees day after day. And then you go out into the field and the tomatoes are ripened from the summer sun. And you have to have a hanky in one hand and the tomato in the other because the juice is just dripping down your chin. It's got to be a BLT. That's
I love that.
Go.
BLT. That is perfect. Absolutely perfect. I wasn't expecting that. That is awesome.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to just stay with the tomato. Right?
No, it's a BLT.
I love it. Farmer, thank you so much for being with us today. I look forward to our next chat. We love you. I love you. Be safe. Be healthy. Thanks again.
Back at you. Thanks for having me on. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast, where you'll find any of the materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. You can also browse other episodes and subscribe.